Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at the new ColourPop Press Powder eyeshadows. I got two of the palettes when they were released earlier in January. I have here, this is Cherish and this is Crush. These two palettes, being how the size that they are, the format, how it's 5 shadows, and it's in this kind of rectangular shape, it really gives me Natasha Denona vibes. And Natasha Denona has mini eyeshadow palettes. I'm going to hold up two of them so you guys can get a sense of how similar they look. This here is the Mini Love Story. It's the most recent mini palette from Natasha Denona. This was released at the time of filming about a week ago. And I will hold up Cherish, which I think, obviously the color story of the two are not the same, but it certainly does remind me, these two remind me of each other. The Zendo palette is a little bit more kind of soft pink or dusty rose. So I think the similarities between the Mini Love and Cherish is a little bit closer. I will do swatch comparisons, and what I have on my eyes today is from the Cherish palette. If there are any shades from my Natasha Denona collection that I find similar to any shades here, I will also do some comparison swatches. So let's look at more details of the actual ColourPop releases. First thing I do want to show you, besides the two color stories, is the packaging. These are the boxes that the ColourPop palettes come in. You can see we have the color story name here. On the back of the boxes is where you have the shades printed. On the palette itself, the shades are also printed visibly on the back. With the Natasha Denona mini palettes, these are the boxes they come in, and the shades are also printed on the back along with the actual palette names are on the front. Now with the shades name being printed in the back, they're actually much smaller. We have a lot of the ingredients for every shade taking up most of the space that is available. The ColourPop palettes are made in the States. The shelf life is not printed anywhere that I could see. Natasha Denona's mini palettes are made in Italy. They have a shelf life of 24 months, which is really consistent with all of her eyeshadow products. The ColourPop eyeshadow palettes retails for $10, and the Natasha Denona palettes retail for $25. And I checked this before I started filming, but these palettes are currently out of stock, which is pretty typical for ColourPop. Any popular items tend to go in and out of stock. They will be restocked at some point. I will put links below. You can sign up to get notified when they're back in stock. So with this video, I had in my mind to actually purchase these palettes when they were announced and compare them to Natasha Denona. It's what I asked on my Instagram to see if you guys were interested, and the majority voted yes, you did, or you were interested in seeing a video of this comparison. So even though there are no, the color story itself and the shadows themselves are not really dupes of Natasha Denona's, we're just going to simply compare the experience of using it. The ColourPop Press Powder Shadow Palettes versus the Mini. And as you can see, I do have a demo for today's look. We're going to do some swatches, we'll head into the demo, and at the end I will summarize my experience, my thoughts and opinions. Again, with the huge price difference between the two, $10 versus $25, it's going to, I think if nothing else, has really good value. So let's get on to the swatches. I'm going to focus on the Cherish palette today. We will find time to create a look and do the same kind of dedicated video using Crush at another time. With Cherish, there are two matte shades, two metallic shades, and this one is kind of like a shimmery matte satin shade. You'll see the texture more when I swatch it. This is what the shades look like on my fingers. The metallic shades, any metallic shade of ColourPop that I've used is always just very soft to the touch, and these pressed powder shadows are really no different. So first we'll start with the shade Destiny, which is right here. It is a pretty chunky I guess it does have like chunky glitters in it, but it's very smooth, very blendable. Then we have Adore, Matte Shade, followed by Faith, Metallic, that matte satin shade with some shimmer in it, and then finally we have Forever. For today's look, I did use all 5 of the shades because I was curious to see if it was possible to create a textured look that had dimensions by using all 5, or were some of the shades, once you started blending them together, they start to look like one shade. So that's something I'm always curious and want to test and see. Now that we've swatched all 5 of these from the Cherish palette, let's go into some Natasha Denona eyeshadows. From Natasha Denona's Mini Love Story, I find the 2 that might be most similar in terms of tone to the Cherish palette might be these 2 shades here, which is U and R. So this is R, I'll swatch it above Destiny. And U, I'll swatch it just right here. U is a lot pinker than anything found here. I think the Cherish color story has a lot more red and brown undertone, whereas R is a much smoother metallic than this one here that's a bit chunkier and more textured. Looking at Natasha Denona's Zendo palette, I'm going to take this metallic shade here and swatch it against this shade from ColourPop, which is called Faith. And I already know it's going to be different, but we'll just compare for fun. I think there is some similarity. It's obviously not the same as the one on ColourPop, but it is a lot more red in its undertone, and it could probably fit nicely within this color story. When I looked beyond Natasha Denona's mini palettes, I did find a shade from her bronze palette, Magma. This could be similar to the matte shade found on Cherish, so we're gonna swatch that. And then while we're at it, I did look also at the Lila palette, and I think this mauve shade here might also have some similarities, so we're going to swatch both. This is the mauve shade from the Lila palette. I do think it's still cooler than this matte shade from ColourPop, but they do have very similar vibes. Both have a little bit of brown and red undertone to it. And then we have Magma from the bronze palette, which actually might be the most similar shade to ColourPop. And I'm gonna swatch Magma just right here. I think the 2 is pretty similar. This is more red and this has more brown. I do think the Natasha Denona one, that matte shade, is smoother and it swatches nicer. Well, let's head on to the tutorial and I'll see you guys at the end. I'm taking the shade Forever and we're adding that to the outer corners. I'm taking a blending brush to buff this shade towards the rest of the lid. Then we're taking Adore and we're placing that from the inner corners outwards towards the center of the lids. Then we're adding Precious right along here. It'll be our transition shade. Then we're taking Faith and we're adding that from here towards the middle of the lid. Taking a different blending brush, I'm going to blend the shades between Precious and Faith a little bit better. And I'm going to go back into Adore, and we're adding that to the crease. We're going to dip back into Forever to deepen the outer corners a little bit more. And like before, we're going to go back in and blend that shade towards the center of the lid. There is a little bit of fallout. I just want to show you guys. And it's not a lot, but enough for me to take a little bit more time here and just make sure I get everything. So the good news is there isn't a lot of fallout right around here. It's just in the immediate area on the lower lash line, which is good. Now I'm going to take Destiny with the finger. I'm adding a little bit of that onto the center of the lid. Okay, this is very pigmented, and it's a lot more than I expected. So I'm gonna go back in with a brush here to just diffuse that a bit. Since I added way more than I thought I was going to, it immediately softened up the look. So the right eye, I have Destiny kind of just all over, except for the outer corners, versus the left eye where I did not put any on. So I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna go in a little bit more light this time. This is kind of what I was going for, but you know, now that we have this, we're just gonna make sure the other side matches. I don't mind how this looks. I think it's still very pretty. It's just not what I had in mind originally. For blush, I'm using Chanel's Fleur de Printemps. This is the Duo Highlighter and Blush. And then the highlighter. For lips today, I'm taking Wayne Goss's lip pencil. This is in the shade Natural Berry, and I'm just going to line the lips. And for lipstick, I'm taking Chanel's Le Lion. This is in the shade Beige Rougissant. And then I'm going to add a little bit of the Chanel lip black in the shade Inflexible, because I want there to be a little bit of shimmer. And I also want to make the lip a little bit more nude, or cooler I should say. Because I think between the eye look and the lips, it's really, really warm. And I just want the lips to be a little bit cooler and let the look or the colors on the eyes kind of shine through a bit more. This is the finished look. While I do like how this look turned out, I think it's very easy for these three shades, even though they look different on the palette and the finishes are different between these three. It's very easy for them to sort of end up blending together. This deeper shade here is probably more distinctive, so it's more like these two shades. It's really easy to blend them together. And when I think about, you know, what I had in mind and what I ended up creating, it was kind of a fluke that I added too much of Destiny and it lined up everything here to still give me somewhat of a gradient look. And I feel that if I use Natasha Denona's Mini Love Story, for example, I would be able to create a gradient look without the same kind of maybe challenges or roadblock. Like I know I can create a gradient look with this with confidence, whereas this sort of, you know, as I was going through it, I found out, the shades are not as equipped to give you that. Now there's nothing on this palette that says you have to use all 5 shades if you want to do a gradient look or to create any look. So if you do want to create a gradient look from light to deep, you could definitely skip one of these 2 shades here, or you could still use all 5, but you could use the shade to lighten up one of these to give you that gradient look. Or you can even just use the shade here, start with this, and then maybe blend these 2 together, and then finally go into the shade. So I guess it's just not as intuitive if you approach it in the same way that you would a Natasha Denona palette. In terms of shadow quality, I do think these pressed shadows are good quality. And usually if these shadows are very powdery or they have a lot of kick up, you tend to see it on the pan because it just goes all over the place. And when you apply with your finger, for the sake of a swatch, you use more pressure, or at least I use more pressure than I would with a brush. So you can see here, there's really not that much kick up, and that's a positive. There's good color payoff. From the swatches, you can see they all appear pretty smooth. Not as smooth as Natasha Denona's in terms of her matte shades, and look how refined her metallics are in comparison. But it's still good. For $10, I think you get a lot of value out of this. And from this experience that I've learned, I do think generally the Natasha Denona palettes have a better color story that can give you distinctive looks. And if you were to use all 5 shades, you can still get a very textured look that has a lot of depth and interesting differences between all the shades. Whereas the ColourPop one, it's kind of, I think it just kind of depends what you're trying to do with it. So that is probably the main difference. It's just like the color story, the curation of the shades. And in terms of the quality, the Natasha Denona shadows are generally softer, more pigmented, and easier to blend out, easier to layer on top of each other. I didn't really have any frustrations with the ColourPop, so I think back to the whole value of it being $10, you still get a good product. And finally, I do want to compare the actual palette packaging. We talked about the packaging, like the boxes and everything at the beginning of this video, but I think it's worth mentioning that these 2, you know, they're not the same size. You do get a bit more product with the ColourPop palettes. Now, how rectangular and pointy and pokey these edges are in comparison to the Natasha Denona Mini, how rounded these corners are, how smooth they are to the touch. Holding these 2 like this, not a ton of pressure, just like, you know, holding it firmly in your hands. This feels much, much nicer to the touch than this. Again, these are pointy. This feels really smooth. I guess the plastic, this bottom part where the pans sit on top of, feels more substantial. It's heavier. This feels kind of hollow. So packaging itself can be quite pricey. And I think when you look at $25 versus $10, some of that cost increase is going to have to do with the packaging itself. Sometimes you'll hear me talk about, especially with the Makeup by Mario palettes, I always say how nice they feel in my hands. One of the things they have for that palette is also these rounded corners. It just feels really sturdy, feels really nice. The ColourPop palettes just close with pressure. Same thing with Natasha Denona, but it just sounds a little bit smoother. So there you have it. I think there is a difference in terms of quality. There's a difference in the packaging, but I still think the ColourPop palettes do have a lot of value. and the shadow quality is really pretty good. I think what's missing is the shadow curation. I think there could be a little bit more difference. These photograph very beautifully because look at all these like, you know, kind of red, brown, sort of like maybe even a touch of purple shade in here. Photographs really nicely, but when you come to use them, you just need to be aware they could blend into each other and it might not give you the effect that you're looking for. Let me know below if you're interested in seeing a dedicated video with this palette, Crush, and I will see you guys very soon in the next one. Take care, have a good one, bye.